Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. I am Andrea Belfanti, the Executive Director of the International Society of Hospitality Consultants, and welcome to Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity, Benchmarking the Hospitality Industry. Now, we could absolutely spend days and days talking about this, especially with our amazing panelists, but we have 45 minutes, so we're going to jump right in. I'd love for each of you to take a minute to introduce yourselves. And Bashar, you're up first on my screen, so I'll start with you.
Thank you. Delighted to. Thanks for having me. Thanks everyone for joining a topic that's near and dear to my heart. I am Bashar Wali. I am sort of a self-described hotel geek. I've sort of been in hotels for 25 years, worked from the ground up. And today I have two companies, one called Practice Hospitality, hotel management company, and one called Disassembly. That is a hotel real estate company. And I have the dubious claim of being the guy who never stays in any hotel more than once or one night ever. And my current count in the city of Manhattan is 206, and I am ashamedly proud of it. So there you have it.
I have so many follow-up questions on that, but I'm going to stay on
We'll
task.
save it. We'll save it.
I'm going to stay on task. And Erinn, I'll head over to you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Andrea. It's great to be here. Likewise, I've been in the industry for about 25 years or so, but I came into the industry from the sports and event side of the industry, and more probably prominently in the golf arena. And from there, I kind of worked in sponsorships on the event side, and then I moved into the event side, but from the sales side, which was the restaurants. And so I worked for Jillian's Entertainment, which is now Dave & Buster's, and loved that, did that, and then I decided to teach what I was doing. And so I started teaching at Johnson & Wales University in Charlotte part-time before I just made the full plunge. And so I've been now kind of teaching probably about 15 years, but it's been a great experience. Was able to teach over in Singapore when UNLV had their campus there. And then it's brought me kind of back over. And then I was at Boston University Temple, and now at Georgetown University in their Global Hospitality Leadership Program.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you. And I think we have one more panelist that should be joining soon. We had a little discrepancy with the timing. So Davon Reaves is our third panelist. When she joins, we will add her right in. In the meantime, I'd love to hear from both of you. What do you think for the hospitality space? Do you think we are ahead or behind the rest of the business world when it comes to DE&I issues?
I'll jump in if you don't mind. I sort of have been watching this for a long time, and unfortunately our industry has the sort of false narrative that we are diverse. And the fact of the matter is, when you look at the bottom of the scale, as it were, our working population are largely diverse, largely immigrants of all walks, shapes, and nationalities and color skin. And we give this false impression that we are in fact diverse. And the sad reality is that as you climb up the ladder, it gets wider and wider and wider and male dominant. And for those who sort of go to the conferences there are two big conferences hotel owners go to, one in LA in January and one in New York in June, Alice and NYU. And it's a clear indication of the problem our industry has, because you stand on the balcony in LA in January and you look down and it is a sea of middle-aged white men in blue suits. And it kind of speaks volumes as to the lack of diversity, in fact, at the top. And I will say in the last 5 years, you're seeing more females, which has been fantastic, but in terms of a darker skin tone, non-existent. So clearly we have a problem. I think we hide behind the working class folks as our diverse sort of cover shield, but then we miss out on the top. And I think we all need to do more to see more people from every color and every nationality at the top.
That's right. The amazing Ashley Johnson from AHOA says we don't have a diversity issue in hospitality. We have an equity and inclusion issue in hospitality. And I think that's right on. So Davon, welcome. I said that we had a little issue with timing, so thank you. What I'd love to do is go to Erinn next. And what we're talking about is, do we think the hospitality industry is ahead or behind the rest of the business world when it comes to DE&I issues? Oh, we can't hear you, Erinn.
Sorry about that. Absolutely. I think the data says it clearly from both the Castell Project, but even earlier on when the NAACP did their racial report card. I think it was as early as 2012. They really sort of looked at boards. They looked at senior leadership as well as ownership. And so from that report, conversation started, but it really hit within the last few years. So absolutely. And I think that one of the areas also when we're looking at, especially entrepreneurship is different than the access areas when it comes to senior leadership. But what I noticed a lot within the data is that it's generally around the director level, which is that mid-level career point where we begin to lose women and people of color. Now that actually aligns a lot with other industries. And largely I can infer from that is that during that particular time, it's kind of getting into the job is one thing, but when you get into that middle is the gray area of your career. There's no plan. And a lot of times there's only enough information about once you're in the leadership position or if you're trying to get into the industry, but that gray area, which is middle management, makes it extremely challenging. And so that is an area that really needs to be addressed.
Great. So Davon, I'm going to bring it to you and I'd love for you to give us your introduction, tell us a little bit about who you are, answer the question, and then we'll keep going.
Apologies for the tardiness, a little mix up on timing, but we're all here. I'm actually in a hotel as we speak.
Ooh.
I know, right? My name is Davonne Reese. I am the founder and president of the Vonne Group. We are a consulting firm and we teach people how to become a successful hotel owners, particularly African Americans. So I'm happy to be here to talk about diversity. It's a subject that I'm passionate about. I'm pleased to be on the same panel with Dr. Tucker and Bashar, and of course you, Andrea.
Thanks, Davon. Great. So in your opinion, where do you think hospitality is with regards to other, the rest of the business world and DE&I issues?
I think
or it's kind of already been said. That's fine.
It's already been said. I mean, we've been talking about this conversation, I feel like forever, right? Mm-hmm. But now, well, I guess that's good because at first we weren't really talking about it. It wasn't a part of the radar. But as far as the hospitality industry, I think we are doing better compared to other industries. I think we still have a lot more work to do. Mm-hmm. I noticed when people say that the hospitality industry is diverse, we're talking about more so of the entry-level workers and the back of the house workers, not necessarily the executives or the C-suites or the decision-making. Mm-hmm. So that's where we need to work on when it comes to diversity.
Yeah, absolutely. So I love it when a plan comes together. I did not know their answers to this, and I'm trying to share my screen here. So we might take just a second. Let me actually go through this while I'm trying to share my screen. So I'm going to show some numbers in a minute from the Castell Project, but basically they're going to say exactly what you guys have just said. While I'm pulling that up, it's not just about numbers, right? It's not just about checking the box and your quarterly reports or whatnot. This is also, we're talking about human beings, individuals. So I'd love to, let's get personal for a minute, right? So I'd love to hear from you all, was there a seminal moment in your life or your career that kind of got you motivated to want to get involved in DE&I issues? And Bashar, I'm going to start with you again. You said this has been a long time passion of yours. So tell us why and when.
I mean, clearly I am an immigrant. I came to this country and was given a lot of opportunity. And, people often say, you're hardworking and the other person isn't. And I'm here to tell you that a lot of what I've done has been luck, right time, right moment. And certainly you work hard to make your luck. You don't sit on the couch, but it always felt like I had to do more than that person next to me, right? Because I had a different weird name. My skin is darker. I had to do more to get that job. And I overcompensated for it by being the person who never said no, who always worked extra. So I felt that I had to sacrifice more and suffer more. And I always felt that should never be the case. It's not the right thing to do. You should reward people based on their performance and their skill sets, not the color of their skin or their national origin. And I would say in the last 5 years, again, as I became more, as you grow up and you start noticing more things and focusing and kind of stepping away from the forest to see the trees, I mean, the Alice conference example is truly jarring, right? It is jarring. It is middle-aged white men across the spectrum. And you sort of say to yourself, you come across, we talked about middle management, you come across many amazingly talented people, right? Often I'd have these people that worked for me at the time that were sort of, I'd look at them and I'd say, man, one day I'm going to work for you. You are that person. You're so smart. You're so incredible. One day I'm going to work for you. And I look around and I never see those people make it to the top. So interestingly enough, during the pandemic, thanks mostly to Clubhouse, where I met Davon, lots of amazing people, it gave us a forum where we could have a safe conversation and talk a lot about it, right? With no one could see what you look like, no one could see anything. We just had really good and raw conversations. And we've sort of, I've come to learn through that process. For me, I would say the seminal moment for me was relatively recent, where someone gave me this analogy. And by the way, I think my focus on the DEI issue have been largely focused on the African-American issue, because I think, like, for example, I go to the AHOA conference and I learn, which I did not know before, Andrea, you probably know this, that 60% of the hotels in the US are owned by Indians, which is amazing, right? I mean, good for them. So when you start looking at, there's lots of missing classes in our ranks in terms of the higher ups, but certainly the African-American contingent is definitely missing from that. So I learned this, and this was my seminal moment, that when little kid goes to his African-American parents and says, hey, mom and dad, I'm thinking about going into the hospitality industry. And mom and dad look at him and say, are you out of your mind? We've been fighting for 400 years to stop serving the white man, and you want to go serve him? And the seminal moment is this idea of service, which is the industry we say we're in, versus servitude, is that how African-American folks think of our industry, because they don't see anyone that looks like them on the top. They see them all as busboys and drivers and waiters and housekeepers. So this notion of service versus servitude, I think changing that narrative sort of was that moment for me. And I started saying, really, our focus should be on showing so many more African-American children that you, in fact, even though sadly, very few people look like you at the top, you may be the person who changes that narrative. So kind of showing them early on that there's a career in hospitality. So it shifted my focus from sort of bitching about what is, and in fact, taking action from the beginning where it matters at grassroots, going to high schools in challenged areas and say, look, yeah, I don't look like you, but there are a lot of people that look like you that are sort of working their way up, and you too could have a fantastic career in the service industry that's not servitude.
Mm-hmm. So interesting, AHOA was actually founded by Asian Americans that were being discriminated against. So they thought if they came together, they could get, more respect and do the basic things that they needed to get their jobs done, because they were, so it's a really interesting story, and what an amazing thing that has come from that challenge. So I've got my technology working. I think the panel a couple panels ago was technology. Quick. So Erinn mentioned the Castell Project. There is amazing data. I'm going to show you a slide with their website in just a second. There are also many underrepresented groups that DE&I can apply to. Race and gender are just two. Of course, there's religion, sexual orientation, lots of other things. We've got great data for these two groups, so I'm going to focus on them, but not to discount other underrepresented people. So when you look at this, we've got the green is 2019, the bluish purple is 2020. They're relatively the same as you go, but when you look, Erinn, I think you said it, at the director level, that's where we've got the highest. Still not great. Under 3% of directors in hospitality are Black. And then it keeps going down to the president and CEO level, where it's under 1%. So I think we all know intuitively, anecdotally, that there is certainly a representation issue, but to see these numbers, I think, is pretty powerful. This one is how many, so for every one woman, how many men are there in a role? And again, if you start at the bottom at the director level, it's almost on par. And then as you go to the VP, the very next one, man, Erinn, it's like you're in education and you know this stuff. So that's when we shift from, for every one woman, there's two men, go all the way up to the CEO level, and it's one woman for every 17 or more men. So this is castellproject.org. This is where the data came from. I highly recommend you checking it out. I think they've got really amazing data there. And as a foundation for these conferences or for these conversations, I think it's really powerful. But like we said, it's not just about the numbers. So I'd love to hear, Erinn, from you, your seminal moment and kind of what's motivated you to be so active in this space.
Sure. I'm going to very, very quickly. Unfortunately, it hasn't just been one. It's been a series, which I think is pretty common, I think, for many people of color. My first one was the Black tax story that came out in Charlotte, North Carolina during the CIAA tournament, where African Americans were charged a Black tax at a particular hotel. It affected me because I was on the local organizing committee that helped bring the CIAA to Charlotte. And so for me, it affected me very, very deeply. And then the second time was I attended the International Association of Hispanic Meeting Professionals, where we really learned about the cultural nuances of different groups. I said, I need to start teaching that. So I started to teach that in my meetings and conventions course. So the African American meetings market, the Hispanic meetings market, as well as LGBT. And then my third one just came in about, I guess now it's been 4 years, where two African American gentlemen were at a coffee shop in Philadelphia, and the police were called on them by management. And it was really from there that I said, enough's enough. I read an article where the Black chefs were the Black owners, and that just, for me, really sparked for me to start the DMV Black Restaurant Week, which is in its 4th year now. And so for me, it was about action. But it's for many African Americans specifically, it's not one particular time. It's generally a series of these points in their lives, right? That they kind of go, now I'm, I would like to do something, or I'm fed up, or leave. And that's where we have to sort of capture that.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you, Davon. I'd love to hear about your kind of seminal moment and what got you into being so active in this space.
Probably years ago. Fortunately, I'd had subtle racism, against me, or I had to experience it, but it was mostly more so from hearing stories from my grandmother and what she had to go through. So she was definitely before all of our times. She grew up in where she had to walk to school, and she only and she had to, like, sticks and stones and things were thrown at her and her siblings, and she was a sharecropper, and the highest education she received was an 8th grade education. And so her story inspired me to fight harder, because what she went through, I can't leave her legacy in vain. And so I didn't have to go through what she had to go through because of people in her generations and later generations. So that's what inspired me. I had subtle things overlooked for promotions because of the color of my skin, because I'm a woman or because I'm too young. So subtle things. But fortunately, I haven't had anything that was jarring. But when I hear those stories and I see those stories and I see those statistics, it hits me, and it's like, okay, I'm an action person. I'm a type of person where if you want to complain, then you have to do something.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Great. So, Erinn, I'm going to come back to you. You're in education, and all of the labor. I know there was a labor panel earlier on this conference, and everybody's talking about labor, right? I wish it was like a swear jar. Anytime anyone said labor crisis, labor issue, labor shortage,
labor and diversity.
Yeah, there's a lot of, it's always being talked about. And I know a lot of the solution is we need to get more people in hospitality school. Bashar, you mentioned it with, the perception. I've heard, we need better PR in the industry kind of thing. So what do you think we can do to get more diversity in our students?
Yeah. Great question. So yeah, I kind of view it from a different perspective. One, coming into starting to work in Johnson & Wales, I think now there's probably more the numbers wise, more students of color and women that are in these programs now than I think ever have been. So the narrative is changing, but the reality is that once they get out, they're not moving up with, in the industries, or they're still facing the same challenges. So one of those, I'm a huge advocate of really looking for diverse faculty members. I think it's exceptionally important. Especially where I am right now, Georgetown University, we've made our pledge to be not just inclusive in hiring, but also in materials, making sure that students are reading not just articles and about leaders from just one particular perspective. I was asked by the library to they had extra money to be able to get more resources. And so I'm going through it, I'm looking at what are the top hospitality books? Just regular books, no textbooks. And in those searches, it's still the same books that have been around for 15 years, 20 years. Now, it doesn't mean it's not relevant, but it's the same voice. And so I had to go dig into the Amazon world and all of the other, university non-research oriented books to start seeing now books that are coming out with women who've been in leadership for Starbucks, and starting to hear their stories. So to add that to the reading materials as well, so students can get inclusion, not just from the professor, but also from the readings. And then I think also being on the restaurant side, the barriers to entry are lower, but the problems are absolutely it's huge in that avenue. There was a point in time in which there were probably about 4 African-American CEOs that ran food service companies. And so that was that kind of, when you see those images, it kind of raises that interest. You start seeing, owners of franchises. All of that is kind of gone now. So there's definitely the gap there, and I think that's what a lot of students are looking at. But in the restaurant side, a lot of interest, especially in ownership. The challenge, though, is that access.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Davon, you should teach a course on ownership and how to do that for hotels. Oh wait,
I do.
Oh wait, you do.
I do. I'm actually having an event this weekend. Yeah. It's a 2-day weekend. Mm-hmm. Doing a hard hat tour behind the scenes. And what I noticed 2 issues in our community, meaning African Americans. One is the access to capital. It's like the biggest issue. And then the second issue is the knowledge, right? They don't think that, a lot of people that I come across, and I even, I was guilty of this starting in the industry, that you couldn't own a hotel, right? In the collegiate programs, it's typically more, majority of the time is more operational focus. They're teaching you to become a general manager. They're teaching you to become, an event planner. They're training you to get into, maybe a private club, but it's a small percentage of schools that teaches you about the transactional side, right? Meaning asset manage, brokerage, ownership, appraisals, all of those different things as far as where those numbers and why they're so low, right? So we have to, in order for us to increase those numbers and increase one of the things that we should do, in my opinion, to increase those numbers is start at a collegiate level and letting people know of different minorities or different backgrounds, that there are other pathways as far as career pathways within the hospitality industry outside of operations.
Mm-hmm. Great. So Bashar, we've talked a little bit about schools and how to get students in there. And then Erinn, it sounds like you're doing amazing things on how to keep them engaged and show them diversity. Davon, you've talked a little bit about the ownership piece. Once we've got these students and they're graduating, what do we as an industry need to be doing with regards to recruiting and hiring? I think we can talk all day about the problems, but what are some, how can we fix it?
Applying pressure, obviously, which is the tool we have today. And in fact, you're starting to see the big brands that have the means and resources they're partnering with the Howard universities of the world to kind of do on-campus recruiting, maybe start a whole hospitality program. But ultimately, our strongest tool that costs us nothing is our voice. Continue to talk about the issue. And for those of us who are fortunate to have access, we certainly should be looking at our ranks and saying, do we have enough diversity within our ranks? And are we looking at sort of promotions equally? And are we thinking about mentoring? And are we thinking about taking somebody under our wing and sort of bringing them up through the ranks? Mm-hmm. Interestingly enough, when it comes to sort of this whole diversity issue, I think it's becoming more and more, and inclusion, it's becoming more and more of an everyday conversation. And truth be told, I personally was very worried that it's sort of a BLM moment and it will go away. It was sort of like the hashtag du jour, but it seems to continue to hold its place that it deserves, holds the attention that it deserves. And I think even those who had turned a blind eye historically are now looking at it and instituting mandates. I mean, you probably know, Andrea, a lot of brands now, at least the forward thinking ones, are saying we must buy X% of our inventory from Black owned or minority owned businesses. So there are things you can put in place to continue the conversation. This will not happen overnight. Clearly, you're seeing we talked again about labor, right? We have such a great opportunity to go and harvest all these good seeds that we're planting and take those people and bring them up through the ranks. There's not a single answer, one thing you can do. I think we have to continue to offer support where we can. Like to Davon's point, I often, when I do these conversations, people say, well, what can I do? I'm just one person. I say, well, listen, there's someone on this panel today who's trying to do it. You know someone that you can introduce them to. That's good enough for me. Even yet, send them an email and say, good job, thank you for doing the good work that no one else is trying to do. So I think we collectively, it takes a village. It's going to take a long time, but I think we get overwhelmed by the road ahead and we become paralyzed by how overwhelming it is. So you kind of really have to think about it in baby steps. This problem is global, obviously. This problem has been embedded in our DNA as humans, it seems. And it's funny because we talk about kids not seeing color. We teach them how to see color. And I think we have to unteach our children to sort of make the world better for us in the future. So I say, support whoever's doing good work, connect them, write them a check if you can, go protest, write to congressmen. There's endless ways to do it. In our industry specifically, I think recruiting from historically Black colleges is a really important one. Doing internships and offering those kinds of positions to people from sort of high school students from those areas to help them. There are lots of different ways you can do it depending on where you are.
Great. So Erinn, once we've hired these folks and, we've all heard some of these conversations and we know there are companies that are setting goals to hire X percentage of underrepresented groups by this year and by that. But once we hire those folks, once we get them in the doors, how do we make sure as an industry, what do we need to be thinking about to make sure that they're not just checking a box, that we're not just worrying about the numbers we're reporting out, but we're actually taking advantage of having a diverse workforce and ideas and making them feel welcome and heard and all of those good things that include the E, right, on the DE&I. How do we make sure that happens?
Yeah, sure. There's so many various ways. I really reflect back to when I was, even what I do now. And when I look at, some of the better places to work, the employers and more importantly, the bosses. All right. So, employer is a big word because it's kind of like this huge name that's out there, but it's the people that are in direct managerial and supervisory positions that really affect the attitudes, of course, of the employees and even the behavior in many aspects. So I think employers need to really allow employees the opportunity to provide a space for new ideas and to teach each other without the need of them feeling, that their ideas are silly or we can't do it or, it's been done. When I was working still in restaurants, there was an incident that happened when I was even working where we had a dress code. And so the particular way that a particular guest was dressed, they had on it was a velour sweatsuit at the time. And so, one of our AGMs, forced them to leave. And so they wrote a letter and it became like a really big story. And so within our managers meeting that we would have weekly, I just felt the need to say something. I said, let's just talk about this. I'm not a fashionista, but I am somebody that understands, just what it works. And I'm like, well, the velour sweatsuit is not really an athletic, it's more fashion. And, kind of just going into the explanation of that and how Timberlands are not, for some people it's what they work in, but for the most part, the cleaned look of it all is more fashion. And so we need to kind of take that in consideration. And he said, I just did not know that. And so, but the fact that my general manager was really open for us to do that really helped us just as colleagues, just with each other, let alone also to be able to draw that towards the guest and customer themselves.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, I've said it before. You cannot say you are not a fashionista. You look.
I know. Look at you, right?
I'm sorry.
Glasses. Our fire.
I'm calling something on that. I can't say that on this panel, but I'm calling it.
And
So
Andrea, I just want to add one more thing real quick, if you don't mind. One of the things that I ask sort of my colleagues now is I say, if you get invited to sit on a panel and it's a bunch of middle-aged white dudes, turn it down. If you walk into a meeting and it's a bunch of middle-aged white dudes, walk out. Until we take radical action like that, it's just going to be a fad and people are checking the boxes. But when they realize that they're starting to lose people who care, who are talented, because they're not representing what the real world looks like, I think that's a powerful message you send. And the other thing I wanted to add is there's this sort of something else I learned that's disturbing is, we rely a lot on AI now, right? Sort of in employee selection. Well, the computer can only learn from the past. And if the past where humans did it was skewed one way, the computer is going to say, I noticed that anyone named Andrea had higher chances of being hired than somebody named Davonne. So all of a sudden, AI is racist. And how do we change that narrative? And how do we build systems from the ground up rather than continuing to use systems that rely on what we did as humans, which is by definition has not been done right? Look at the results. So I think there's so much more we can do specifically to address those issues as employers. And again, by taking bold action, think about this. You invite me on a panel, I say, who's on the panel? No, thank you, I'm not interested. Why aren't you interested? Because this panel doesn't look like the real world. That's a powerful message you can send to someone.
yeah, that's great. I love that. I haven't heard that before. Thank you for that. So I want to pause real quick and say that we've got about 10 minutes left and we'd love to answer any questions you have. So put them in the chat, make sure we get them, feel free, type away. And while we're pulling that up, I want to talk a little bit about, and I'm not even sure how to phrase this question. Erinn, you talked about your example. That was an amazing experience for your managerial team, but that also helped your unit serve your guests better. Mm-hmm. Right. So when we think about inclusivity and diversifying our management teams, and as you go up, you're also talking about treating your guests better, which is what we're all in this business for, is hospitality. And let's just bottom line it. There's a lot of money in diverse groups. There's a lot of money in LGBTQ groups. There's a lot of money in Black travelers. The diverse groups spend money. So is there something, how can we tell that message, right? So when we think about motivating the hospitality industry, when we think about making change, should we be talking about the bottom line? Should we be incentivizing CEOs to hire? Or is it just, how should we do this? How can we talk about money? Is it okay to talk about money in this conversation? Davon, I'm going to go to you. Yeah.
I would say we have to talk about money. I mean, hospitality is a people industry, but at the end of the day, it's a business. Yeah. And so when groups start not coming back to our industry, or they start being the what are the word I'm looking for? They start being radical. They start building their own businesses. They start being the disruptor, right? We have all these disruptors because we're not being inclusive. We're not welcoming. In 2019, I think it was MMGY, they had a study that over $109 billion was spent on travel by African Americans, but yet we own less than 2% of the hotels in the industry, right? And then with the Castell Project, even less than 1 or 2% is in the executive staff. That's an issue, right? That shows power that we have within our community, but it doesn't reflect it in the industry. And to Bashar's point, if we start getting folks to say, hey, no, I'm not going to do this, or no, I'm not going to hire you as a management company for my hotel because I don't see any people of color, or your executive group isn't diverse, I'm not going to work with you if you don't have enough vendors. And for people is another point that people can do. People have been reaching out to me. They're like, Davon, I feel bad. It's not people in my organization that's not diverse. Can you recommend people? It starts there. It starts there by having these conversations. So these conversations are actually working. Oh, I think we got some questions in the chat for you, Andrea.
Yeah, so it says, I did research about countries being ready for the pink dollar, and you'd be surprised about the findings. So I think that's from Matthew. So Matthew, I'd love to hear more about that. If you want to summarize the findings or ask a question, I'd love to dig into that. So we've just got a few minutes left. I want to hear, or actually, Erinn, did you have any more thoughts about kind of whether or not, yeah.
No, I mean, I think, Davon makes a great point, Bashar makes a great point. I mean, money in the sense of, there's the discussion of how to access it, that needs to be taught, how to not be afraid of it and have intelligent discussions with owners. I mean, even if you work in operations right now, I mean, everybody now, you have to know how to talk to an owner. So you have to understand and be comfortable with having intelligent conversations about fiscal, with that. I think that at the same time, there also needs to be the dollar, of course, investment into really having our employees understand the various groups, regardless. So I had a student just last semester, John Ebon, I'll give him that shout out, who did his capstone on the lack of diverse employees in the hotel industry. So he worked for a hotel company and he interviewed general managers and hiring managers, and it was just absolutely blown away. They do not know how to hire. Now everybody knows how to service, when it comes down to service customers that have certain levels and layers of disability, but no one is talking about a very, very large unmet group that is not recruited, and everybody needs workers now, and that's the what we would say in the US, disabled or disability. And it was a very eye-opening experience for him, but it was also and I said to him, is a really call to action to really start putting together programs to be able to have, teach properties, et cetera, where people work there, how to actually recruit and employ individuals with disabilities. So just the fact of just having that gap and really seeing that gap really exists was something that was eye-opening for him. But I think that's also a testing spot of some of the solutions he gave for that.
Great. Bashar, any thoughts on the money conversation?
I mean, sadly, money rules the world. And I think you've seen the LGBT community take a huge advantage of it successfully. And they were voting with their dollars. And I think we as conscious consumers need to vote with our dollars. And truth be told, anyone who doesn't think that when you have an offering equal to the next competitor, that someone isn't going to choose you because of your stance on things is badly mistaken. So I think we as owners and operators need to demonstrate and be authentic, quote unquote, overused word, meaning and have an unapologetic point of view. And I think the consumer is and will continue to vote with their dollars. Interestingly enough, we were saying, like, hotels have lots of badges on the door, as it were, right? AAA and mobile and all these ratings. And we said, and we've been actually talking, a group of us, about this idea of, can there be an objective organization that can come into a hotel and give it a DEI badge of honor, a rating of sorts, where if I want to choose you because of that rating, because it's important to me, I can do it. And there's some momentum around that idea, but I think fundamentally money drives everything. Again, sadly, that's the society we live in. And I think people that have spending power should utilize it to make sure their voices are heard. And I think the Black community has not done it yet because I think they're gun shy about it. But you think about sort of Black travel, huge numbers out there. And anyone foolish enough to pay attention to it is just hurting themselves. Even if their goals were purely capitalistic, it still matters. They have a lot of money, they're well-traveled, and they want as good an experience as any. So I think if you have the data, use it to your benefit. And if you don't have it, find a way to get that data and use it to your benefit. And a PR campaign, obviously, right? The more we hear about it, the more I think it matters and people pay attention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I will say I do want to push back just a smidge, kind of, in that there is data out there and has been for many years that more diverse boards and companies are more profitable, right? And so CEOs and higher ups at all the big companies have seen that data for a while. And yet we're still having this conversation. Won't it be amazing when they call us to be on a panel, it's not about diversity? And it's like, there's no diversity because we don't need it anymore. I think that's going to be.
I'm talking about using the power of the traveling dollars in the industry more so than the profitability of the corporation. I mean, by the way, we all know the women make the decision for travel in any kind of relationship. Yet we don't think of highly enough of them to give them the CEO jobs. So I think the system is broken. And I think, again, we must continue to shout from the rooftops every single day. This is not a trend and this won't be fixed tomorrow. It's generational. But if we stop talking about it, it's going to go away.
Absolutely. So we've got 2 minutes. So I'm going to do a speed round of what do you think? What is one thing? Bashar has already given us some great examples. What is one thing that we can start doing tomorrow and or something we can do to help educate ourselves for those of us that want to do more in this field? And Erinn, I'm going to start with you.
Doing research, I mean, just going and Googling, because it does help in many aspects. But even more importantly, I think for a lot of you, especially who are on here, who follow people, in social media, start following people who don't think like you. Because what it does is that it'll allow you to kind of see a lens. It doesn't mean that you will agree with them, but it allows you to see a lens of where they're coming from and really being able to kind of hone in on really what is the problem here. And in many cases, there could be a lot of things, but in many cases, it's people just don't know. It's interesting, even when it comes down to group travel and the African American even travel dollar. First of all, boycotts have worked, and so stopping the travel dollar, it has worked. It is there, but at the same time, it hasn't necessarily worked on kind of the actual employee sort of side. But from a traveler perspective, it has. But at the same time, there are so many people that don't understand the nuances of the African American group traveler. If you don't understand the importance of emancipation and travel, if you don't understand the traveling to your family, if you don't understand the dynamics between the Black church, the historically Black college, as well as the Black professional organization, please, you don't put the same lens that you would in your events class where you learn that there's a mice market and a Smurf market, right? The reality is that when you're talking about especially groups of color, those two markets actually interact. They intersect. So you have to be able to understand that when you're actually doing the bookings as well. So it's really about, there's a lot of information, being intentional about going and starting to look at the information first, even sometimes before you start asking people, questions, be intentional and inquisitive intellectually.
I love that. Thank you. Davon.
I know we're out of time, and Bashar and Dr. Erinn, they pretty much summed up everything what I would have said and probably said it a lot better than me. But my recommendation would be to, again, just like Dr. Erinn said, if you see, and Bashar, we talked about this too, if you're on a panel, if you're in an organization and you don't see people, it is okay to reach out of somebody who doesn't look like you. It's okay to reach out if it's a woman, if you say, hey, we all look the same. All right, we're getting the same results. And that's the issue. If we want to change the hospitality industry and stop having all these disruptors coming in and taking our money that we have to pay out eventually, we need to stop thinking the same way we've been thinking.
Great. Bashar, final word in 30 seconds. What can we
I'm going to give you a quote. I'm going to give you a quote that I posted on Instagram that I love, which goes, I don't mind differences of opinion. I do mind hate. So we don't have to agree. We can respectfully disagree. And I think take bold action. Talk is cheap. Walk out of a meeting because it doesn't represent reality. It takes a lot of guts, but unless we do that, nothing is going to change.
I love it. Well, thank you all. And thank you for your time as attendees, as panelists. And let's keep talking and having these, I call them sweaty conversations. Let's keep doing it so we can move forward.